activists across the diaspora, from the United States to Australia, who are playing a part in the digital version of a reignited Oromo protest movement. So we are joined by Marartu Kitila, Toltu Tufa, and Wako Ragasa. Baganagan uftan. So the discussion that we want to have today will be in Afaan Oromo and English. Afaan Oromo fi Afaan Ingilisin haasoini akka namni Ingilisi beekus Afaan Oromo beekus hubatun. So we have to start with why we are here today. So Adecha Obelesi Kenya Hacaalu Hundeessa tu arra walitti nufide. Hacaalu, like the meaning of his name, was leading in his ability to capture the essence of Oromuma, Oromo identity and culture, and Oromo resistance against cultural and political marginalization. Akkuma maqaa isaatti Hacaaluun caaladha. Namni muuziqaa isaa dhageeffatee aadaa Oromoo, ilaalcha Oromoo, beekumsa Oromoo gadi fageenya barata. Muuziqaa isaa diddaa qeerroo fi qarree gadi fageenyatti ibse. We've heard this saying before. Hacaalu's music was the soundtrack to the Oromo protest movement, starting in 2014, led by the Qeerroo and Qarree to resist land grabbing in Oromia, political marginalization, and to demand equality and dignity. This movement led to the transition moment in 2018 when the previous prime minister resigned. Hacaalu qaama seenaa Oromoti. My mother said to me recently that what we are experiencing right now is what she experienced when she was our age. What we can't forget is that Hacaalu is part of a historical legacy of Oromo artists that have such a unique ability to capture not just Oromo culture, but the struggle for freedom and equality for the Oromo people through their music. And he's a part of a legacy of Oromo artists that have been targeted and killed because of this unique ability. Ebisa Adunya, Usmayo Musa, Abdi Koppe, and many others, and now Hacaalu Hundeessa. So Gafin Tokofa, what I would like to ask you all is, Malif Ethiopian Yerohunda Artisti Oromo Bekomo Ajefti. Why do you think the Ethiopian system, Ethiopia, has this legacy of killing inspirational and prominent Oromo artists? I pose that question to all of you.
Sirbi akkuma beekamu ergaa dabarsa akka filmii fi kitaaba. Dhugaa dubbachuuf kitaaba filmii caalaa sirbatu dhaamsa akka gaariitti uummataaf dabarsuu danda'a. Maaliif yoo jenne sirbi gabaabaadha, si'a baay'ee dhaggeeffachuu dandeessa, utuu hin quufiin itti dabalee kan akka sirbaa miiraa keessa nama galchus hin jiru. So it's not just the message being transmitted, it also carries with it a lot of emotion. So it is able to teach people, it's able to mobilize them and make them politically conscious. Keessaayyuu sirbituuniif sirbi Oromoo baay'ee dhaamsa sabboonummaa qabu, waa'ee aadaa fi seenaa Oromoo nama barsiisu. Kanaaf jecha Itoophiyaan, mootummaan Itoophiyaa fi warra Itoophiyaawwanetti moofaatti amananii akka Oromoon of ta'ee jiraatu fedhiin qaban ijaa ta'ee fi karaa sirbaan akka uummanni Oromummaa baree konfidensiitiin jiraatu hin fedhani. Kanaaf sirbitoota keenya kan akka Eebbisaa Addunyaa, Yoosef Gammachuu, amma immoo akkuma beekamu Hacaaluu Hundeessaa nu jalaa ajjeesu akka isaan Oromummaa uummata keessatti hin jabeessine jedhaniiti.
Akkuma Waaqoon jedhee, artistoonni keenya particularly isaan kan sabboonummaa cimaa qaban, isaan kan Oromummaa isaatiin boonan, isaan kan waa'ee qabsoo fi hiree Oromoo sirban, kan akka Eebbisaa Addunyaa fi Hacaaluu Hundeessaa. These artists are seen as an existential threat to Ethiopianism and to the Ethiopian identity. Mootummaan Ethiopia yeroo hundumaa, they are desperate to suppress Oromummaa and Sabboonummaa Oromo because it is a fundamental contradiction to the anti-Oromoness, which has allowed them to consistently exploit Oromo land, resources, and people for the benefit of the Habasha. Kanaafi artistoonni keenya kan Oromummaa fi Sabboonummaa isaanii hin shakkine qabsaa'aa fi goota nuuf ta'anii. And that's why I think they're susceptible to becoming a target.
Wanti nu beekuu qabnu ka namni Itoophiyaa kana wanti isaan barbaadan jalqabumarraa Oromoon akka harka isaan qaba jechuun akka Oromoo bulchuu barbaadani. Humnaan haa ta'uu wanti nageenyi takka illee hin jirtu warra kanneen faa uummata Oromoo kana qabaachuu qabna. Maaliif akka qabaatuu barbaadan jennee otoo wal gaafanne karaa economy, karaa lafti dachii kenna, dachii bal'aa waan qabneef jecha, nageenyi waan qabneef jecha, waan nu harkaa qabnu kana waan barbaadaniif jecha nu harkaa fudhachuu barbaadani. Wanti kana nama harkaa fudhachuudhaan humnaan fudhachuu dhiisi sammuu namatu hidhaan harkaan qabaachuun rakkinaan qabu. It's very easy to demoralize people mentally than to worry about them physically. So I think it's in their best interest to demoralize Oromo people, to lose a sense of confidence in themselves, to be able to constantly be in a state of recovery as opposed to a state of building for themselves. And they've created systems around this. And one of the systems is to make sure they pierce at the heart of Oromo people wherever they reside. And for us, the quintessential Oromo form of resistance is through singing, is through song, particularly given that they banned historically reading and writing. The verbal or the oral tradition is particularly important to Oromo people, and of course also becomes one of the places where the Ethiopian narrative seeks to quell the Oromo consciousness.
I completely agree with everyone, and what I particularly noticed is that when Hacaalu was interviewed by the Oromo Media Network about a week ago, he started to criticize, I would say slightly, the Abiy government. And we know that there has been extensive reporting of human rights abuses throughout the country, particularly in the military command posts in Walaka, Guji, Borana, and Shawa. And he was mentioning that there are human rights abuses being committed by the government. And he also criticized the Menelik statute. And I would like to hear your point of view on this. I think that because he was sliding towards starting to criticize the government, his assassination was a strategic attack because he is uniquely capable of recultivating a new Oromo protest movement. What do you guys think about that?
Personally, the way I see it, I don't know if we can blame Abiy directly, but it is the same forces that he brought back from the dead that I believe killed Hacaalu. So when I say the same forces, I'm talking about the people who had no problem with the status quo under Haile Selassie, who had no issues with the mono-ethnic cultural domination that used to exist and still actually exists very strongly. And then he represented, of course, the antithesis to that vision. So when they saw him, he's a very confident person, Hacaalu. When they saw him on TV coming out there, just saying things that Oromos generally all believe, Oromos do not consider Menelik a hero, far from it. Just him being there very unapologetically saying that, it infuriated them. It's like, how dare he says this? Let's also remember the statue of Menelik is being in the middle of Oromia, in the capital city of Oromia. It represents conquest. It is, we have taken your land under our control, and then we're going to put our king's statue here. So the fact that he criticized that, he was just questioning a lot of things that they find very sacred. And I think the social media campaign against him, the smear campaign, the death threats that occurred on social media following the OMN interview, they leave little uncertainty about which elements organized and then committed this foul act. And also there is very little uncertainty that these groups would not be in the state of mobilization that they're in now if it was not for people like Abi resurrecting what was more or less a dead movement.
So anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that that we see this as a surprise, whereas in actual fact that this has been the operating module for the Ethiopianism, the One Ethiopia where Oromos were supposedly willing to be part of when Abiy assumed his position because they thought it was going to be one for all of us. And what happened was, in joining or attempting to join that narrative, when the Oromo people raised their issues, they just reverted back to square one, saying that actually there is a different version of Ethiopia and this is the one that you have to abide by. What does it mean to be Ethiopian? We can see now through the death of Hacaalu Hundeessa that to be Ethiopian essentially means to let go of your identity as an Oromo person. And there's no success in that. There never has been, there isn't right now, and there never will be in the future.
So, Mero, do you have anything to add? So, we're all mourning Hacaalu's loss, but we also know that the Ethiopian government essentially denied Hacaalu a proper burial in the heart of Oromia, Finfinne. And I want to ask you, why do you think this happened? Maaliif obboleessa Kenya Hacaalu handhuura Oromiyaa Finfinnee keessatti awwaalcha akka aadaa Oromootti dhoowwatan.
Beekaan dhoowwatan bara isaanii waan isaan barbaadan jalqabumarraa gaafa shuggutiin isaan dhahanii hospitaalatti galchuun isaanii eessatti galchanii akkamitti fayyisuu dadhabanii sila akka inni dhukkubsate sila bakka biraa osoo jiraate nagaan wayyaa'uu danda'a ture. Isaan beekaatiin achirraa asitti oli gad oofanii haga lubbuu isaanirraa fixutti akkasuma godhaniitiin sila faamilii isaanitti deebisuu dhiisi bakkuma inni jiru san inni Itiyoophiyummaa kana waan kabajaa dhabeef jecha nullee kabajaa isaatiif dhabna jedhaniitu karaa waan isaan godhan kana xayyaaraatiin as geessuu achi geessuu Finfinnee ala baasuu achi booda faamilii isaa yeroo booya san keessatti faamilii isallee rukutuu ajjeesuudhaaf kun maal jechuudha? Kabajaa dhabuu malee. Kabajaa isaatii osoo kabajaa isaa dhabuudhaaf kabajaa uummata Oromoo hunda dhabuu jechuudha. Inni uummata Oromoo jecha waan wareegameef jecha nullee akkuma tuffii isaanii akkuma nu tuffatanii akka tuffii keenyatti fudhannee jirra bar. So the reason why they did it is to insult us, to show us, to put us in our proverbial place, so to speak, and also to test the reaction of the Oromo people. What are they going to do about it? Are we going to react in the same way as before? Or will we take it to a new level? And at what point will we say enough is enough?
I agree. This is completely a tragedy. I feel like we cannot truly justify it with an explanation. But what I will say is that it was, as Toltu said, it was clearly very intentional. It comes across as, some type of power play to show their dominance. Akkuma Toltuun jette, starting with how they whisked away his body so quickly, the careless back and forth, denying a Finfinne ceremony or burial, rushing to, do the funeral before people even had a chance to grieve, denying the public a chance to participate in the funeral. Jechuun beekaan godhaniiru, karoora isaanii ture, mootummaan kun ummata keenyaaf, ummata Oromoodhaaf kabajaa waa takkayyuu hin qaban. Kana beekuu qabna.
Akka gabaabaatti Abiif mootummaan kun Oromoo sodaata. Finfinneen erga Addis Ababaa taatirraa ka'ee waan Oromoo fakkaatu of keessatti arguu hin barbaadan. Hojii baay'eetu hojjetame akka Oromoon achi keessatti hin argamne irratti. Magaalli kun ajjeecha Oromoo irratti akka hundaa'e beeku jaa ta'ee fi yoo Oromummaan as keessatti jabaate, yoo Oromoon as keessa jabaate sirna keenyaaf badiidha jedhanii yaaman. Haile Sillaasee irraa ka'eeti kun. Hanga ammaatti mootummoonni Oromoo, mootummaan Itoophiyaa kanuma amana. Oromoo ofirraa achi fageessuu sodaatee akka jiraatu fedha. Ooma Finfinnee keessa dhufes akka of dhoksee jiraatu fedha. Bara naannoon Oromiyaa hundaa irraa ka'ee hanga ammaatti akka seeratti Finfinneen handhuura Oromiyaadha. Yeroo achi keessa seentee ilaaltee deemtee achi ilaaltee hin fakkaatu. Oromummaan akka achi keessa hin jirre sirriitti irratti hojjetaniiru. Awwaalchi Hacaaluun keenya akka Finfinnee keessatti hin taane kan godhame ijaa mootummaan akka Oromoon akkas baay'atee handhuura Oromiyaa seenuu feeneef hin sodaatu uummata Oromoo. Oromoon yoo yaa'ee nutti dhufee balleessan isaan uummata Oromoo irratti hojjetaa turanii waggaa lamaan kanaaf sirriitti beeku. Uummanni kun yaa'ee Finfinnee seenaan bakka mootummaa dhufnaan nuuf badaadhaa jedhan sodaatan. Uummata keenya nuun jedhu garuu uummata Oromoo sodaatanii jiraatu. Hanga isaan to the point that they would even disrespect Hacaalu like this.
Very true. So let's discuss what happened then after what the Ethiopian government did after all of this, after the assassination, after the refusal to allow Hacaalu and his family to have a proper burial. So ega Hacaalu ajjeefame booddee mootummaan Itoophiyaa beekamtoota siyaasa Oromoo hidhan. Right? OMN cufanii, internetii cufan. So the Ethiopian government has been arresting prominent Oromo politicians, and we know, such as OFC leaders Jawar Mohammed, Bakala Garba, Hamza Borana, and just yesterday, OLF leaders Dr. Shukut Galata, Michael Boran, Kenasa Ayana, Idosa Taddasa, and there's 2 other OLF members who were driving. And we also know at least 80 people have been killed in protests, and we don't actually know how many more, if there is, because the internet has been shut down. I think we have to also zoom out and think and look at what this violence, the context of this violence, right? This adds to a long list of acts of Ethiopian state violence. During the Abiy regime, it starts with the military command posts, like I mentioned earlier. And then we know that OLF leaders have been imprisoned last year and this year. And this is so even though OLF is a registered political party. We know that Abdi Ragasa was imprisoned, Kayo Fufa, Professor Bayan Ruda, Gada Bulti, and Yaso Kababa. And the violence, the imprisonments, and the targeted continuous attacks on Oromo leaders and civilians and institutions, it's just endless. Shoro Kesuman Motuma Hogantota Oromo fi Institution Oromo, Ummata Oromo, Irati Tiefata, Tiefate, Otun Hin Abatin Itifufe. So Itidabale Filano. Barana Hakame. So the elections were canceled this year in the pretext of COVID-19. And all of this translates to me as a clear reversal of all of the so-called reforms that the world has been applauding for the past 2 years, Prime Minister Abiy and the government. Reforming Sobate, Ummata Oromo, Mana Hidati Gure, Sirna Abba Irre Ijarun Ittifufame. In other words, it's become a clear authoritarian system. So my question for you, as we process all of the tragedies that are ongoing, Hacaalu's assassination, and this context in which there is just endless violence, where do we as a people, where do the Oromo people go from here? Amman boda malin mali. What should we be demanding? What should be our demands, for a reignited Oromo protest movement as a people? What should we be asking for and pushing for?
Akkanan yaadutti bilisummaa malee kaayyoon kabiraa sirrii miti hin ta'u jechuu kooti. Mootummaa yookaan sirna kan sanyii kee jibbu akkamittiin mirga sitti kennuu danda'a? Akkamittiin gaaffii kee siif deebisa? At this point, we can't accept any half measures. We have to be very clear about our demands. And if they're not met by any given political situation or context, then it's just not going to suffice for the Oromo people from this point forward.
I think unless true democracy prevails, there will never ever be peace in that country. Oromo people make up half of the population, and to simply cast them aside will never ever bring peace to the country. And when Prime Minister first assumed his position, no one elected him there. He was put there for a temporary reason to put everything back together. And the Oromos believed and trusted in the process, and they were abused in the process of that. And now we've reached a point that everything that we've tried to do basically has been slapped back in the Oromo face. So they claimed democracy, we accepted democracy, we started political opposition parties, and look what happened. What are they expecting now?
Not to add too much, because they more or less covered what I was going to say, but in terms of where we go from here, it should be understood that I don't think there'll be any negotiation, because we took the position where we were still negotiating when it comes to land rights, when it comes to when justice would be secured, because we were under the impression that eventually we're going to see some prosecution of people who had committed human rights abuses for the last 27 years. We were under the view that eventually the Oromo questions will be answered. I think we have to get to the point that we say no. Justice has to be secured now. The Oromo questions must be addressed head on. There is no other alternative aside from that. And just to add one more thing, Oromia mootummaa jedhanii heeraan bulla jedhu santu seera jedhu olaantummaa seeraa qabachiisuu qabna jedhu yeroo hunda garuu heeraan biyyan bulchaa hin jiran takkayyuu hin bulchine. The so-called reform, as long as they were visible within Finfinne, which operates at its own island, separate from the rest of the country, the international observers, some of the urban elites, they just considered the reforms to be real, even though they did not affect the rest of the country. So, ummannis heeraan mootummaanii heeraan bulchuu dinnaan ummanni heerri hanga deebee kabajamutti qabsaa'uu qaba jedheen yaada.
I think qabsaa'uudhaafi nuti, to be honest, nuti nama biyya alaa keessa jiraanne akkana ta'uu qaba jechuun illee xiqqoo namatti ulfaata. Namni biyya keessa jiru waan isaan barbaadan dhima beekan. Nuti ka godhuu qabnu waan isaan barbaadan isaan deeggaruudhaafi sagalee isaanii ol qabsiisuudhaafi waan isaan barbaadan isaa cinaa dhaabachuun dirqamaadha. Ani akka dhuunfaatitti akka toltuu tufaatii yaadni kee hagas marallee bu'aan hin qabdu. Namni ka bu'aa qabu namni biyya keenya keessa jiru, ka amma hidhamanii jiru, ka amma rakkachaa jiru, ka amma ka ijoollee Hacaaluu abbaan malee guddachuuf deemaa jiranii, mee isaanuma gaafachuu qabna, maaluma godhuu qabna. Akkanuma akkuma amma itti fufuu wayyamoo akkamii jennee isaanii gaafannee waan isaan jedhan fudhannee gatii itti kenninee bakkaan gahuun akka ummata Oromoo diaspora guutuuf nurra jira.
Akkatti ani ilaalu, the way I look at it, Tolto, I completely agree with you. We have to support the people back home. This is to me a repetition of 2014 through 2018, the Oromo protest movement. I won't say the first, but the most visual on the internet and virtually. that protest movement was led by Oromo Youth and other groups showing solidarity with the Oromo people, others like Sidama, Somale, there are other groups that were showing solidarity, but that movement was led by Oromo Youth on the ground. And they had clear demands and clear grievances. And I think that we can learn from that today, because those demands have still not been met. And I think we can support that. And so I would say one of the clearest demands was a right to authentic representation, right? Authentic representation in government. The only way you can do that is through elections and through democracy. But we know that elections have been canceled and there's no opportunity for people to elect their representatives in government. So to me, one of the biggest obstacles to the Oromo protest movement is that we have a leader in a system in which there is no democracy and there's no trust. There's no trust in this system. And so I think the first step really, as a clear demand, just like it happened in 2018, the prime minister has to resign. I don't think that's an extreme ask. I think it's a simple ask because the country now is undergoing chaos, it's unstable, and people don't trust the system. So there needs to be that sort of change right now at this moment. And there needs to be a transition, an authentic transition to democracy. And the other demands, such as stopping the extrajudicial killings and stopping political imprisonment and stopping all of the imprisonment of political opposition parties that were invited into the country to participate in elections, but their members and leaders are currently in jail. Like the whole system has been overturned, and really I don't see any way moving forward for the country and for the Oromo people unless there is legitimacy in the government. And currently there is none, and there is no trust. So in my opinion, first, there has to be a resignation of Prime Minister Abiy because he is not capable of leading the country. And there needs to be a transition towards real democracy.
Mm.
What do you guys think about that?
I feel like that Abiy is not going to let go of this position like the other Prime Minister. I think he's going to hold on to it a bit more tighter. I think just calling for his resignation will not be enough. And I think the Oromo people know that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this does seem to be more of a one-man. It's more of a Mallas era situation than a Haile Mariam Desalegn era. It's very much centered around Abiy. At least during Haile Mariam, there was more of an oligarchy kind of going on. There was a group of people around him, kind of advising him, more or less telling him what to do. But here it is, power is very much vested in one person. It is just the classic African strongman situation. So I very much doubt that he's going to resign off his own accord.
So I want to talk about what we can do as young Oromos in the diaspora, what our viewers can do. I know that there is a lot of social media activism that's ongoing. I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to discuss, what steps do we need to take as a people in the diaspora. And I wish back home too, but currently there's no internet connection. But what can we do as a people to support, what can we do as a diaspora to support the Oromo people back home in the movement against state violence?
I think amplify, advocate, and activate. I think abuse is a lot harder to take place when people are watching and people are making noise. I think a lot of the confidence of the Ethiopian regime has been the silence or the complicit nature of everyone, or people turning a blind eye. So I think it's our job as Oromos in diaspora to make sure that we're shouting out loud and making sure that we're making a lot of noise over a long period of time, to make sure that people's attentions are constantly turning, and to not allow the silence that prevailed in the past, to use our social media and our technologies to keep rallying people, to lobby people, to advocate and activate behaviors and actions. And that may not necessarily bring it overnight, but when you do it long enough, there is a critical turning point where the scales start to tip in your favor. And I think that's something our community, the quicker they get with that show, the more impact diaspora will have on back home.
I think we all agree that our role in the diaspora is, you know, a supportive role. We're not the center of the movement. I think that, especially as you mentioned, given the context of the internet shutdown, we need to, as you all said, amplify the voices that are being stifled, and then also, like, I feel like that should be one of you know, the main demands at this point, because essentially, you know, we want to amplify the voices of our Kero, but the Kero are not able to share their voices with the rest of the world right now. And that's, I think, a huge gap, and we need to work to fill in those gaps by, you know, relaying the messages to the rest of the world, and also working to do anything that we can to make sure that those voices are not stifled.
Right, yeah, so just as was covered, being a voice for our people it's probably the most important time to do that is right now. And by being a voice, that means consistently and over a long period. Don't let it die out. Keep the same energy everybody is having now on social media, which I think is great. It needs to be sustained, because if it's not, then it could all be for nothing. We need to sustain the energy, and I think it's very important that we don't fall into this mentality of, let me, you know, somebody will do it. And, you know, there'll always be somebody who does the advocacy, so it doesn't need to be me. It does need to be you. It needs to be everybody. And just also, I think it's very important, especially for the youth, to stay informed about not just what's happening now, but the context of, you know, the historical context, the political context. So being informed so that you're armed with the knowledge to answer questions, to, you know, sometimes people, well, a lot of times on social media, people will take swipes at who we are and our history. And so you need to be able to confidently respond to that, because there's a big difference between the mainstream view of Ethiopia, the mainstream historical narrative, and the reality our people faced and face to this day.
I totally agree with what everyone has said. I think what I have witnessed so far in these past 2 days, 3 days, that there has been a social media wave to try to educate the world about what's going on in Oromia. What I have seen is that there are people, non-Oromos out there, who are willing to show solidarity, but it takes energy, it takes effort to educate people. Unfortunately, the Oromo issue, even though it was brought to the world stage by Faiz Abdel-Lissa, by the previous Oromo protest movement, at this moment, there is still a large negative narrative that's being spread about what the movement is about. The movement is about equality, it is about dignity, it is about justice. But unfortunately, there is a narrative that I'm seeing that is painting a very negative picture, biased picture of the Kero, and painting it as if this is a movement against other people. And it reminds me of what's happening in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think we can learn a lot from this movement. The All Lives Matter hashtag movement against the Black Lives Matter movement. It's similar. When we're demanding equality and dignity and respect, we are not pushing against any others. We just want to survive and thrive and live peacefully. We want our people to be able to live peacefully in Oromia. So I think that some clear steps we can take is to, one, educate others, raise awareness through social media. There are social media resources that are being shared by everyone here. There are letters and drafts, templates of letters that we can send to our congressional representatives. And these letters can also be used in other countries, not just the United States, Canada, Australia. I think that we have to apply pressure on the allies of Ethiopia. And I think it's a very good opportunity at this moment to do that because of the opening that other justice movements have made, and the Black Lives Matter movement in particular. I think that there are open years in government for movements for justice and human rights. So my takeaway is that we as a people in the diaspora, we have to protest, we have to write letters, we have to sign petitions, we have to continuously wage a social media and communications battle to bring a voice to our people who are being denied access to the internet shutdown. That was actually my last question, and I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to say any other last comments or words, and to pass maybe any messages or information to the audience in Afaan Oromo or English.
Pulani, you mentioned that we're faced with these really challenging, like, I don't know what to call it, people lashing out simply because we are asking for basic human rights. And I think that actually shows that we're obviously onto something. And I think at this point, we're close to whatever it is that we are trying to do. And like Wako mentioned earlier, we need to maintain that momentum and keep it going. When we are under a lot of duress, we have more unity, I think. And amma nuti garagaruma kenya lafara kayachuu qabna. There may be nuances, but at the root, kayon kenya tokko. We want the right to self-determination and the freedom to determine our own destiny. So, tokkummaa keenya xiyyeeffachuu qabna. And we need to stay focused on our demands and amplify the voices of Qeerroo and just not let anything distract us from our goal.
Yeah, so amsatti tokko kanan uummata Oromoo gaafadhu, and I'm very confident they already know this, but Hacaaluun keenya irraanfatamuu hin qabu. Never. Addunyaatu isa beekuu qaba. Oromiyaa qofaa miti, addunyaatu isa beekuu qaba. Ijoolleen keenya isa beekuu qabu. Ijoolleen keenya isa beekuu qabu. Itti dabalee dirqamaan kan nuuf galuu qabu. Silaa jalqabaa tokko taaneenaan biyya keenya keessatti kabaja qabna turraan har'a Hacaaluun dhabnu turre. Nutu cabee, nuti diina qaawwa kennee, diinni immoo qaawwa kanaan fayyadamtee caala gargar nu baasee kan amanuu qabna. Kan amannee maqaa Hacaaluun kakannee obbolummaan nu gidduu deebi'uu qaba. Ummatti kan nuuf galuu qabu. Akka an argutti qabsoon inni ammaa isa murtii fakkaata. Ijaa kanaaf hundi keenya irratti hojjechuu qabna akka dandeenyu keenyatti. Inni biyya alaa sagalee ta'u nama tokkotti hin dhiisin. Nama internetii qabda taanaan, nama qabda barreessuu dandeesse taanaan barreessi. Representative keessanitti barreessi, social media irratti active ta'e, nama si bira jiruttu itti himii kan ta'aa jiru biyya keenya keessatti. Dhaamsi Oromiyaa bakka hunda ga'uu qaba. Warri biyyaas jabaadhaa akkuma isinitti beekan nu caalaa kan biyya keenya fayyadu isin irratti si wajjin jirraa jabaadhaa jechuun fedha.
Warra biyya keessa jiruudhaa fi dhaamsa kan nu qabnu nuti isin waan isin dalagaa jirtan dhugaa waan jajjabaati, waan laafaa miti. Kanaaf nullee hanguma dandeenye sila xayyaarallee dhaabaa jiranii bar namni biyya keessa seenuu hin danda'u, keessa bahullee hin danda'u. Karaa qarshiitiin mallaqaatiin namni hanga danda'e gargaarumaa jiranii, kan dadhabeellee hin jira. Kanaaf waan isin dabarsaa jirtanii hanga dandeenyutti kama kennaatiin isin cina dhaabachuuf gargaaruudhaaf qophiidha. Warra biyya alaa keessa jiru wanti nu beekuu qabnu bar namni ka biyya keessa guddatee dhalatee guddatee jiraatee sababa rakkinaaf jecha biyya san keessaa baqatanii biyya ala deemaniitiin yeroo deebi'an ilaalan rakkina kana arguu isaallee miidhanii bar sammuu namallee tuqaa bar kana arguudhaaf. Kanaaf warra biyya ala keessa jiruun akka gaariitti of eeggannoo godhuu qabna. Dalagaan keenya akka dalagaa har'aa fi boruutii qofaa osoo hin ta'in kana caala dabree yeroo dheeraa nurra barbaachisa. Nullee si barbaanna akka dadhabdellee hin barbaannu. Akka imimmaan yeroo hunda si qabee hin barbaannu. Depression kana hin barbaannu. All the reactivation of the trauma of watching what's happening at back home is triggering a lot of the people overseas who are watching through their telephones. Namni bar hirriba dhabaa jiranii nyaata nyaatullee dhiisanii dhugullee dhiisanii kana hunda uf miidhaa jiranii kanu barbaannu ummanni Oromoo akka haa jabaatu barbaanna malee akka dadhabee caccabee hin barbaannu. So akka gaariitti uf haa eeynu sammuu keenya haa eeynu qaama keenya haa eeynu wal haa jabeessinu yaada adda addaa yoo qabaannes wal obsa qabaachuun hedduu barbaachisaadha. Ammoo warra biyya keessa jiruuti rabbillee isin wajjin haa jiraatu eebba keenya qabdanii eebba hayyoota keenya ka nu dura ture ka isaanillee qabdanii so fuula dura kennaa fi walumaan jirra harkallee qabannee onneefaa wal biraa jirra galatooma.
Totu, that was beautiful. I want to leave it on that note, really. I want to thank you all for joining in this conversation, just the first of many, and not just a conversation. We are going to act. We'll continue to act. We'll continue to resist, to raise awareness, to clearly state our demands for what our people need in Oromia. And, you know, Baye Galatomi, Hundi Kesan, Baye Galatoma. And I just will close here. If anyone has anything last to say, let's just go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Galatoma.